In a quiet village nestled between the emerald hills of northern Valmir, an unbelievable tale began, one that would make skeptics pause and believers cry. A tale that questioned time, tested love, and defied biology. A tale where a young man, just beginning to carve his place in the world, ended up changing the life of a woman old enough to be his grandmother. And not with just words, but with life itself. This story is not about scandal or shock value. It is about the layers beneath the raw humanity, the quiet pain, the burning hope, and the kind of connection that stretches beyond reason. If you've ever questioned how far the human heart can reach, or how fate often rewrites what we think is possible, then this story is for you. Dylan Mercer had grown up under the persistent drizzle of Arendelle, a quiet town where people lived slow and died slower. Nestled between rolling vineyards and ancient stone bridges, Arendelle was beautiful in a melancholic way. The kind of place where change was feared more than the dark, and rumors lived longer than people. Dylan was 23, lanky with thoughtful eyes and a quiet charm that made people either curious or suspicious. He worked odd jobs, gardening, wood chopping, delivery, anything that let him stay outdoors. Most saw him as a loner, not because he was unfriendly but because he listened more than he spoke. He had no grand plans, no towering ambitions. But he did have one thing many lacked in Arendelle: a heart still open, still curious. Everyone in Arendelle knew her name, but few knew her story. Leora Greystone lived alone in the old manor house on the ridge. At 60, she had the kind of beauty that time could not erode: silver-streaked hair, fierce green eyes, and a posture that demanded dignity. Some whispered she had been a dancer in the city. Others claimed she was a widow of a rich merchant. But no one dared ask. She came into town rarely, and when she did, people stared. Dylan met her on a rainy afternoon, the kind that soaked your soul more than your clothes. She stood outside the bakery, struggling with a heavy bag. Without much thought, Dylan offered help. "You're Dylan Mercer, aren't you?" she asked as he lifted the bag. "You know me?" he replied, surprised. "I know kindness when I see it," she said simply. From that moment, something shifted. Not in a romantic, lightning strike way, but in the quiet way that the moon shifts the tides, unseen but undeniable. What began as a casual helping hand turned into weekly visits. Dylan would help her trim the garden hedges, repair broken tiles, carry firewood. In return, Leora offered him tea, stories, and something rarer: genuine attention. They talked about books, about loss, about the ache of solitude. Leora confessed she once dreamed of writing novels, of seeing the world, but life had taken different turns. Dylan, in his honest and awkward way, spoke about his dreams, too small ones, like wanting to plant a tree that would outlive him, or learning to play the violin. Their age difference didn't matter in those conversations. In fact, it vanished entirely. They weren't old and young. They were simply human. In a place like Arendelle, rumors were inevitable. "Did you hear about that boy and the Greystone woman? She's twice his age. Disgusting. Or maybe he's after her money." Leora told Dylan not to worry. But Dylan did worry, not for himself, but for her. He could take the stares, the comments. But he hated the way it forced her to close the windows and pull the curtains. Yet she never asked him to stop coming. And he never did. One winter evening, after fixing a broken window, Dylan stayed for dinner. They drank wine, laughed harder than usual. And when the power went out briefly due to the storm, something in the silence pulled them closer. There was a kiss, soft, hesitant, but filled with a lifetime of longing. It wasn't lust, it was loneliness finding its mirror. In the days that followed, they didn't talk about the kiss, but their gazes lingered longer. Their silences became more meaningful, and the invisible barrier between them quietly dissolved. It was 2 months after that night when Leora began to feel strange, dizzy spells, nausea. At first she thought it was the flu, then maybe menopause returning in some strange twist of fate. A visit to the doctor revealed the impossible. Pregnancy. She laughed. She cried. Then she laughed again. "This is madness," she told herself. "This is biologically impossible." But the test didn't lie. Nor did the scan that showed a tiny, fluttering heartbeat. She didn't know how to tell Dylan, or if she even should. When she finally did, Dylan didn't flinch. He didn't accuse her of a mistake or suggest a way out. He sat down beside her, took her hand and whispered, "If this is real, then it's a miracle. And I want to be there for every step of it." That moment became the foundation of something unbreakable. They didn't know how the town would react or how their lives would change. But in that moment, two souls once adrift found anchor in each other. Love is not always convenient. It doesn't always come in the package we expect, and it rarely arrives at the right time. But maybe that's the point. This story isn't just about a miraculous pregnancy. It's about the unexpected ways people find each other. How sometimes the heart knows long before the mind catches up. What Dylan and Leora shared was not defined by age, but by need, trust, and vulnerability. And in a world that so often tells us to fit in, to follow timelines and expectations, they chose to follow something deeper. The wind in Arendelle carried whispers faster than light. By the time the first trimester passed, Leora's pregnancy, though still unseen, was the worst-kept secret in town. It started with hushed gossip at the market, then pointed stares at the church, and eventually open ridicule at the cafe. "She's delusional," someone muttered behind Leora as she picked out apples. "He must have trapped her," another added louder. Dylan heard it too. He clenched his jaw, his fists, but never his heart. He stayed calm, not because he didn't feel rage, but because he understood it was the only way to protect her. They were fighting something bigger than just rumors. They were fighting people's sense of order, the mental blueprint that told them what was right, what was normal, what was safe. And this was chaos to them. Dr. Elise Braden had been a physician for 30 years. She prided herself on knowing when a case was unusual, but even she had never seen anything like this. "You're 61, Leora. This is not just rare. It's almost impossible," she said, scanning the charts again. "I know," Leora replied, smiling softly. "And yet here we are." The pregnancy was progressing normally. No complications. No anomalies. The baby's heart was strong, and so was Leora's resolve. Still, Dr. Braden was cautious. "Your body will be tested in ways you can't predict. Emotionally, physically. I've been tested by life in far worse ways," Leora said, voice steady. Dylan attended every appointment after that, never missing a single one. He asked questions, took notes, even bought a used anatomy book to understand everything better. It wasn't just about being present. It was about being prepared. When Dylan finally told his mother, she went quiet for a long time. "I trusted you to be sensible," she said. "She's older than me, Dylan." "I didn't plan this, Mom," he said. "But I love her. And this baby? It's real." "Love fades," she snapped. This is going to ruin your life." "No," he replied calmly. "It's the first thing that's given my life meaning." Leora's family, what remained of it, was no more welcoming. A distant cousin wrote a letter urging her to reconsider. "You've lost your mind, Leora. Don't bring shame to the family. Don't let loneliness drive you into madness." But Leora had never felt more sane. She stopped replying to messages after that. They decided to renovate the guest cottage behind the manor. "We'll raise the baby here," Dylan said, hammer in hand, covered in sawdust. "It's old. Like me," Leora teased. "Then it has character." "Like you," he replied, grinning. They painted the walls a soft seafoam green, built a wooden crib from scratch, hung fairy lights on the windows. Every nail, every brushstroke was a declaration. "We are not ashamed. We are ready." They planted daisies in the yard. Not because it was practical, but because it made Leora smile. Sometimes purpose is enough. It was late autumn when the fear crept in. Leora woke up gasping, hand clutching her chest. The baby kicked harder than usual, and for a terrifying second she thought she was losing both breath and child. Dylan rushed in, panicked. He knelt beside her, brushing hair from her face. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too," he admitted. "But we can't be scared," she said. "Yes, we can. But we do it together." That night, they lay in bed, facing the ceiling, hands entwined over the curve of her belly. They didn't sleep, but they weren't afraid anymore. Not really. Arendelle split in two. Some, especially the older women, began to soften. One left a bundle of handmade baby clothes at Leora's gate. Another dropped off fresh bread with no note but a kind smile. Others grew crueler. Someone painted sin in red letters on the wall of Leora's home. Dylan scrubbed it off before she could see. One man from town, a retired professor named Gareth, surprised them both. "You're rewriting biology, you know," he said over tea. "I didn't mean to," Leora smiled. "That's what makes it real," Gareth nodded. History never began with permission, only with courage. With every passing week, Dylan and Leora grew closer, not just as lovers, but as co-creators of a new chapter neither saw coming. They read books together at night, practiced breathing techniques from prenatal classes, argued over baby names. He liked Rowan, she preferred Sage. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they danced in the kitchen while soup boiled over. They weren't pretending everything was okay. They were simply choosing joy where they could find it. A local journalist asked to feature their story in a lifestyle magazine. At first, Leora declined. She didn't want to be a spectacle. But Dylan convinced her. Maybe someone out there needs to know it's okay to be different. The article titled, "A Love Without Limits," The Arendelle Miracle, went viral online within days. People from around the world reached out: mothers who conceived late, young men who loved older women, lonely people who suddenly didn't feel so alone. Of course, the trolls came too, but the love outweighed the hate. For once, the noise wasn't all negative. One night, near the end of the second trimester, they sat on the hill behind the manor, watching stars blink awake. Dylan turned to her. "If something happens, if you don't make it, don't," she said firmly. "No, listen. If anything happens, just know you gave me more in these months than I've felt in years. Maybe in my whole life." She kissed his forehead. "Then I've already lived enough." Silence fell between them, not the awkward kind, but the kind that made space for everything unspoken. Life doesn't follow our rules. It doesn't care about what's supposed to happen or how things should look. It moves in chaos, in accidents, in impossible timing, and somehow, from that mess, it creates the most profound stories. Dylan and Leora's journey is more than biology defied. It's about trust in the face of mockery, about hope blooming where fear had long taken root. And perhaps most powerfully, it's about how two people from opposite ends of life met in the middle to create something neither of them ever dreamed possible. The second trimester brought both relief and reality. Physically, Leora began to glow, not in the romanticized way the magazines describe, but in a genuine, almost spiritual sense. Her skin was vibrant, her eyes clearer, her posture steadier. But alongside the light came shadows. She began waking up breathless, sometimes gripped by nausea or sudden aches in her legs. Dylan watched her sleep, often lying awake himself, haunted by the thought, what if something goes wrong? One night, she clutched his hand and said, "If anything happens to me, promise me you'll love this child twice as hard." He shook his head. Nothing's going to happen. But deep down he understood why she said it. They both knew they were dancing with time, and time doesn't always keep rhythm. On a rainy afternoon, Leora sat in the nursery they had just begun painting. Soft yellow walls, antique wooden crib, a rocking chair older than Dylan himself. She held a small, hand-woven blanket. "I bought this 30 years ago," she murmured. "Back when I thought I'd be a mother by 25. Dylan paused. "You kept it?" "I kept hope," she answered. That moment wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic. But it was sacred. It reminded Dylan that motherhood wasn't just a physical act, it was a lifelong calling, quiet and resilient, waiting patiently for the door to open. It happened on a Thursday. Leora fainted in the garden. Dylan, hearing the crash of metal watering cans, sprinted to find her crumpled near the rose bushes. At the hospital, the doctor stabilized her quickly. It was a combination of blood pressure and stress. But the ultrasound that followed brought more concern. The baby's growth was slightly behind schedule. The specialist, Dr. Reiner, a tall man with a cold gaze, told them plainly, "This is a high-risk pregnancy. You need to prepare for all outcomes, including the possibility of premature delivery or loss." Leora nodded. Dylan clenched his jaw. They didn't cry, not in front of the doctor. But when they were alone, they held each other like people trying to hold the world together. After the hospital scare, something shifted between them. They started writing letters to the baby, one from Leora each morning, one from Dylan each night. They kept them in a carved box beside the bed. Sometimes the letters were filled with fear, sometimes with jokes. Often they were filled with dreams. In one, Dylan wrote, "I hope you have her fire and her laugh. I hope when the world questions you, you'll remember you came from love that refused to ask for permission." They also made new vows to each other, not just as lovers, but as future parents. "We're not just a miracle," Dylan said. "We're a family, and we'll build this one brick at a time." One morning, Dylan's estranged father arrived unannounced. Charles Mercer was a man hardened by loss and alcohol, a former coal worker whose hands shook from years of labor and regret. "I saw the news," he grumbled at the doorstep. "Heard my boys knocked up a woman older than me." Dylan didn't slam the door. He stepped outside. They sat in silence on the porch. Finally, Dylan spoke. "I didn't come to you for approval. I came to peace with you a long time ago." Charles nodded. "You love her." "With every bone in me." And for the first time in years, Charles extended a shaky hand. "Then I reckon you're more of a man than I ever was." In the middle of so much noise, a surprising letter arrived, this time from someone across the ocean. A woman named Alina from Denmark had read the story and sent a handwritten note. "I was told I couldn't conceive at 42. Your story gave me courage to try again. Thank you for reminding us that nature is full of surprises and that love is the most powerful medicine." Leora read it aloud, tears welling in her eyes. "That's why we share our truth," she whispered. "Not for attention, but so others can dream again." They began receiving dozens more letters like it from hopeful mothers, grieving daughters, young couples navigating judgment. And the couple realized their story was no longer just theirs. It had become a lighthouse for others walking in storms. One evening, Dylan placed his hand on Leora's belly and said, "Let's name her." "We don't know the gender," Leora laughed. "Doesn't matter. I want her to have a name when I talk to her." They settled on the name Isla, meaning island in Old Gaelic. "A place surrounded by water but still standing strong," Dylan said. Leora whispered, "Our little island of hope." As they entered the final stretch of the pregnancy, fear returned like a tide. Every cramp, every dizzy spell sent them back to the hospital. They began sleeping less, praying more. Dr. Quinn visited often now. She was gentle but firm. "Leora, if your vitals worsen, we'll have to induce labor early. What are our chances?" Dylan asked. Dr. Quinn hesitated. "Better than they should be, but still a storm." In a quiet moment before dawn, Leora wrote her final letter to the baby before birth. "Dear Isla, the world you're entering is loud. It's full of people who may not understand you or us. But don't let that stop you from loving loudly, from living fully. You were never an accident. You were a whispered wish answered in thunder. I can't promise you I'll be here forever, but I promise to give you everything while I am." She placed the letter in the carved box and kissed it. Dylan saw her eyes full of reverence. "You are the bravest woman I've ever met." Leora smiled through tears. "And you're the only man I've ever felt safe enough to break in front of." This chapter of their journey wasn't about the miracle anymore, it was about the cost of it. The physical toll, the emotional vulnerability, the everyday bravery of choosing to believe in what others dismiss. They stood on a cliff edge, knowing the wind could change at any moment. But they stood anyway. Because faith, in its purest form, is not the absence of fear, it's the decision to move forward in spite of it. The winter air in Arendelle had grown colder, as if holding its breath for what was to come. Leora was now in her 35th week. The doctors had hoped for at least 37, but her body was showing signs of distress. Elevated blood pressure, irregular heartbeat, increasing fatigue. She was barely sleeping. The baby's movements had become erratic. Dr. Quinn called an emergency meeting at the hospital. "It's time," she said gently. "We need to deliver. Now." There was no room for protest, just urgency and fear. Dylan squeezed Leora's hand as they signed the consent forms. "We're going to meet her," he whispered. Leora nodded, voice barely audible. "If I don't make it." "No," Dylan interrupted. "Don't say it." But she did anyway. If I don't tell her, I never stopped dreaming of her. Not for a single day. The delivery room was a place of both sterile metal and sacred silence. Leora lay beneath the surgical lights, masked, her hand gripping Dylan's tighter than ever before. A C-section was the safest route, but even that held no guarantees. The monitor beeped steadily, too steadily. Dylan stood beside her head, whispering comfort into her ear, though his own mind was a whirlwind of terror. "She's strong," the anesthesiologist murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Dr. Quinn and the surgical team worked quickly. Incision, retraction, retrieval, and then a cry. A piercing, defiant wail that shattered the stillness like sunlight breaking through a storm. "She's here," someone gasped. "Baby girl. Breathing on her own." Dylan's knees nearly gave out. Leora, eyes wet, smiled faintly as she heard the sound. "Isla," she whispered. But moments later, the machines began to shriek. Leora's pressure dropped. Her heart rate faltered. Blood loss surged. Dr. Quinn shouted orders. Dylan was ushered out of the room. And just like that, the woman who defied time was dangling in the space between worlds. Dylan sat in the coldest room he'd ever known. The hospital's walls were too white, the lights too bright. But all he could see was the dark possibility that Leora might not make it. He stared at the tiny bundle in his arms, Isla, eyes closed, soft breaths rising and falling. "You're everything she ever wanted," he whispered. He rocked her gently, heart torn clean in half, one part overflowing with joy, the other with dread. And still he waited. For word. For life. For her. 3 hours passed. 3 agonizing, empty, endless hours. Then the door opened. Dr. Quinn walked in, blood-splattered scrubs, eyes rimmed red. But there was a smile on her face. "She made it," she said. Dylan broke. He wept, not like a man in control, but like a child being handed back his world after it had been stolen. "She's not out of danger," the doctor added. "She'll need days of monitoring. But she's alive. And she asked for you." He handed Isla to the nurse and rushed down the hallway. Leora lay in the ICU, tubes running from her arms, skin pale, but her eyes, those storm-gray eyes, still had fire. When she saw Dylan, her lips curled into the smallest smile. "You didn't name her something awful while I was unconscious, did you?" He laughed through his tears and kissed her forehead. "No, she's Isla, just like we said." They stayed like that for minutes, him holding her hand, her fingers twitching against his. "You came back to us," he whispered. "I wasn't ready to leave," she answered. Leora held Isla 2 days later. Her arms shook, her body still fragile, but her soul was radiant. Isla looked up with wide, unknowing eyes. "Hello, little storm," Leora whispered. "You turned the whole world upside down, didn't you?" Dylan stood behind them, one hand on Leora's shoulder. There are moments that don't require words, moments that anchor a life. This was theirs. News of the birth spread like wildfire. 61-year-old mother and 26-year-old father welcome baby girl, one headline read. Some celebrated, others mocked. But amidst it all, thousands of strangers sent letters, gifts, and videos. An artist from Brazil painted a portrait of Leora holding Isla. A midwife in India sent a hand-stitched blanket. A retired professor from Canada wrote a poem. Age be damned, let hearts entwine. When love transcends the chains of time. A child is born, a truth retold. That life can bloom where none foretold. A week after Leora's discharge, the town of Arundel hosted a service, not a religious one, but a community gathering. For healing. For reflection. For grace. Leora and Dylan stood in front of the crowd. Isla slept in her mother's arms, oblivious to the crowd of nearly 300 people. Dylan spoke first. "I used to think love had rules. That there was a right time. The right kind of person. But love doesn't care about rules. It only cares about truth." Leora added, "We're not here because we were lucky. We're here because we chose to believe in something when no one else did." The applause wasn't thunderous. It was soft, respectful, like rain falling on dry earth. Later that night, Dylan wrote a letter, this time not for a box, but for Isla to read when she was older. "Dear Isla, you were born from fire and faith. From a love so unlikely, it made even science blink. The world will question you. They will question us. But never doubt the way you came to be. Your mother gave you her strength, her story, her soul. And I will spend every day teaching you not to fear difference, but to honor it. You are not a mistake. You are a message. That. The days after were slow and golden. Sunlight fell across the crib. Leora sang lullabies in the same rocking chair where she once wept with fear. Dylan brewed coffee one-handed, holding Isla against his chest. They were tired, unglamorous, messy, and completely whole. In the end, what defines a miracle? Is it the impossible act itself or the quiet courage that carries us through it? Leora did not just give birth to a child. She gave birth to hope for every woman told she's too old, for every couple mocked for their love, for every human being who still believes that possibility begins where certainty ends. Their story is proof that love is not bound by calendars or clocks. It simply is. Arendelle blossomed in spring, as if nature itself had waited for this moment. Isla turned 1. The small garden behind their cottage was filled with pastel balloons, laughter, and friends. Leora sat in a wicker chair, Isla bouncing on her lap, her silvery gray hair catching the sun like strands of moonlight. She looked tired, yes, but alive. Gloriously, defiantly alive. Dylan held a camcorder, documenting every tiny squeal, every smashed piece of cake, every shared glance between mother and daughter. Later that night, he uploaded the video with a title. She was 61 when she had our daughter. This is our first birthday together. The next morning, it had over 10 million views. The internet responded not with ridicule but reverence. A woman from South Korea shared, "I was told at 45 that I'd missed my chance. But now I believe again." An 18-year-old boy from Kenya wrote, "I lost my mom when I was 6. Watching Leora and Isla gives me peace I didn't know I still needed." And a nurse in Brazil commented, "I've helped deliver thousands of babies. But this story reminded me why I chose this path." Leora, reading through the messages one by one, wept not from sadness but from being seen. 2 years passed. Leora was now 63. Isla, a vibrant toddler with hazel eyes and endless curiosity, was the living embodiment of miracles. Dylan had been offered a book deal, Love in the Time of Judgment, Our Journey. But he hesitated. "It's not about us," he told Leora. She smiled. "But it could be about everyone else who needs to believe again." So he wrote. He told the truth. Not just the romance but the rage, the ridicule, the risks, and the resilience. And when the book launched, it became a #1 bestseller not for scandal but for soul. With the proceeds, Dylan and Leora started the Isla Foundation, a non-profit supporting unconventional families. Single parents by choice, late-life mothers, intergenerational couples, same-sex parents, adoptive dads. Their slogan was simple. Love builds families, not age, not blood, not approval. They funded fertility grants for older women, scholarships for children born of so-called taboo unions, therapy for those shunned by society. And slowly, change began to ripple through places they'd never even been. Leora began a ritual. Every birthday, every milestone, she would write Isla a letter sealed in a golden envelope. These would be opened on her 16th, 18th, 21st, 30th birthdays. Some days, Leora ached with the knowledge she may not see them all. But she wrote anyway, not with fear, but with fierce grace. "My darling Storm," she wrote once, "when the world asks why your mother had silver hair when you were still in diapers, tell them. She had enough time to love you completely. That's all that ever mattered." Time, ever faithful to no one, moved forward. At 68, Leora fell ill. A rare degenerative lung disease. No cure. Limited options. She spent her final year in a sunlit room, surrounded by books, plants, and the people she loved most. Dylan never left her side. Isla, now 7, read to her every night. Leora passed away in spring. Peacefully. Holding Dylan's hand. Isla's drawing tucked under her pillow. Dylan stood at her memorial, voice shaking but strong. Leora wasn't a miracle because she had a baby at 61. That was biology, science, and yes, a little bit of divine rebellion. He smiled. But what made her remarkable was that she never once let the world define her. She chose love, again and again, even when it cost her comfort, even when it meant being alone, even when it terrified her. He looked out over the sea of faces, hundreds of them, some crying, some nodding, all changed. She showed us that life doesn't wait for permission, and neither should we. Years passed. Isla grew into a young woman full of compassion, clarity, and strength. On her 16th birthday, she opened her first sealed letter. My Isla, today you are 16. If you're reading this, it means I'm probably not sitting across from you, coffee in hand, telling you in person how proud I am. But I am proud. Fiercely. Eternally. I hope by now you know this. You were never a mistake. You were a masterpiece I dared to dream into existence. The world may still whisper doubt, but you, my love, you will roar truth. Love. Mom. Isla cried. Then she picked up her pen and wrote a reply. For the stars. Dylan eventually remarried a soft-spoken teacher named Claire. Not a replacement. Just a continuation. Isla called her Claire, never Mom, but loved her deeply. The family grew. Quietly. Peacefully. But in their living room, next to the photo wall, stood a glass case. Inside it, the original pregnancy test. A pair of tiny infant shoes. The first letter Leora wrote. And a quote etched in bronze. Let love be louder than doubt. Visitors always stopped there, sometimes crying, always reflecting. Years later, a documentary filmmaker approached Isla. We want to tell your mother's story, she said. Not as a scandal, but as a revolution. The documentary, The Storm and the Seed, premiered at Sundance. It ended with Isla reading from her mother's letters, her voice clear, full of love, speaking to every corner of the world. She didn't break the rules. She rewrote them. Standing ovation. The Isla Foundation now had offices in 6 countries. Dylan, retired, spent his days mentoring young writers. Isla ran the foundation full-time. On the wall in her office was a single framed sentence from her mom. If they say you can't, ask them gently, but what if I can? This is not just a story about biology or boldness. It is a story about belief. That love can bloom at any age. That parenthood is not about timelines but intention. That the human heart, when led by love instead of fear, can redefine what's possible. If you've ever been told you're too old, too young, too different, or too late, let this story be your reminder. You are not too anything. You are right on time. Believe in the life you feel called to, and help others believe too. This story moved you, share it. Not for the views, but for the thousands of hearts that need to hear this today. Subscribe for more stories that challenge what's possible. Support unconventional families around the world through the Isla Foundation link. And remember, let love be louder than doubt.